We live in a society, said the meme.
And it sucks!
Squid Game answered. Or maybe capitalism equals bad. I mean, there is the all too subtle symbolism. But no, not quite. The baddies do hold strictly to the ideal of equality of opportunity though. The show may be trying to demonstrate how this ideal could never be attained, or how it may not be enough. But no, it still doesn't sound right. While searching for the theme of this story, I came to 3 conclusions. 1. That themes suck. 2. That all of the above, although present, are wrong, and if not wrong, at least incomplete. And thirdly, I began to wonder whether the show's themes mattered at all for its success. After all, you don't need a story to have a message, but you may want a story to share one. In this video, I want us to dig into it, leaving open the possibility that Squid Game is only telling a story. It may be me introducing all of this nonsense into it, like that pedantic rich kid that keeps bullying the protagonist in all of your favorite magical school settings. And, thinking better about it, it's all of your favorite YA dystopians as well. Or maybe it's just all of your YA stories. Period. So, I guess the rule we're supposed to take away from this is, remember kids, bullying is hot. Anyways, let the games and spoilers begin.
And may the odds be ever in your favor.
If you're somehow still unfamiliar with Netflix's most successful show to date, the one currently amassing well over 111 million viewers worldwide, half of whom have probably turned otaku by now, then where have you been? Seriously, where? What's that? You were watching Arcane? Arguably Netflix's best show ever? Well, you're not wrong. Netflix do be killing it this year. Hope I get to work with them someday. Anyway, as I was saying, Squid Game is Netflix's new Austin Powers, a banger. The show has had a fantastic reception regardless of country or culture, including my own stock-up arse. And you know how I am about this comedy's hyped up shows when I say that even this one had a bit of a slow start. Squid Game begins with a long section of setup, as the show takes its time to introduce you to its protagonist, Gi-hun, and just how much of a charismatic yet innocent loser he is. Throughout the first episode, we are shown how this man-child copes with the effects of his gambling addiction, one that does not just earn him physical suffering but emotional as well, forming a wedge in his relationship to his old ma and a bigger one with his daughter that he might soon be too late to cross. And although sometimes comical and eventually touching, it does take some time to warm up to the guy, making for a slow start to the narrative that can risk losing viewers. TikTok, what have you done to us? At this point, we're almost 20 minutes into the first episode and still have not been introduced to the premise of the show. It is not yet clear what any of this is about. Fortunately, one of its best scenes is about to remedy that. This scene is nothing short of amazing, as it manages to establish plot, theme, character and tone all in one, like a microcosm of the bigger narrative that is to come. Gi-hun is approached by a stranger who wants to play a game. If our protagonist can beat the stranger, he gets 100,000 won, and if he can't, he gets a slap. This could be considered the inciting incident that introduces the first major choice for the hero, to play or not to play. More than that though, it builds character as we see Gi-hun's cheeks redden from the consecutive hits. It foreshadows plot by being a lower stakes version of the upcoming games. It sets the tone by sprinkling a bit of humor in its delivery, and it makes many of us ask ourselves if, in the shoes of the protagonist, we wouldn't do the same. Would we play the game? In his case, the answer is yes, and so we enter the Squid Game. It is halfway through the episode then that we are introduced, finally, to the premise of the show, or at least a part of it. Our desperate characters are invited to join a competition with the chance to win so much money it will not only cover for their debts, but solve world hunger besides. To win, all they have to do is play a game, just like they did as kids. This premise, although interesting and digestible, is by no means novel or absent from the mainstream, as we have seen similar contests take place in stories such as the Hunger Games, where tributes are chosen from their dystopian society's districts to compete to the death for money, glory, and fame. Which makes our premise for Squid Game incomplete. The catch? Well, what can you pay with when you have nothing left? Just like every time Gi-hun loses he gets smacked, every loser in the game gets killed. For this reason, the stranger in the subway scene is even more impressive, because it also lowers this concept down to earth, making it something that does not seem so extreme, something we ourselves could consider doing, something more palatable. Now, hear me out. Most of us have probably never played a game where if we lose, we die. But I can't be the only one who has played something more stupid than this, where if you lose you take a shot of vodka, or if you lose you jump into the freezing water of the pool at 3 AM and without any clothes, or if you lose you have to confess and face your friend group's version of Cersei Lannister's walk of shame, and so on. Anyway, this way the idea of the Squid Game becomes feasible, because we're presented first with the possibility of risking our physical integrity in exchange for money within the context of a game that is no more brutal than any sports we play today. Then, after we're shown all that Gi-hun stands to lose if he does not join the game, it no longer seems like such a stretch for him to play, or, through empathy, for us. The stranger in the subway scene gets us to ask what a person would be willing to do in desperation, which the story will take further in its exploration of theme, as the games get more and more brutal and the characters more and more desperate. It is an expert introduction of the show and the concept of human nature. What would you be willing to do if you had no options left? What would you be willing to sacrifice for you and those closest to you? Who would you sacrifice? But dude, what even is theme? Yeah, right, I forgot about that. For those non-nerds out there, themes are the ideas expressed and explored by the narrative. These may or may not come to a particular conclusion and tend to leave a lot to audience speculation, making it so they may or may not leave a clear message. You know, like most relationships. This means that a lot of the time, these can be ambiguous, and therefore, what one person considers the moral of the story may be different to another. As examples, Mistborn's main theme is trust, and its message that one should not avoid people for fear of betrayal, but risk pain in spite of it. Hellblade's theme is one of loss, and how it is a necessary part of life that we must all accept to leave room for love, while Bladerunner's is for people smarter than me to decide. Throughout Squid Game's following episodes, we get to meet its cast. From the start, we know that they are all in complicated situations by their mere presence in the game. Slowly, however, the show will take us through each of our protagonists. We have met Gi-hun, and his reasons to win the money are already ours. But as we learn more about the others, so will theirs. From Sae-byeok and the fear of failure that keeps him from facing the embarrassment of not being all that he, his mother, and those around him may hold him up to be, to Ali and his bright-eyed goodness and naivety, from Sae-byeok and the ruthless competence she employs for the care of her brother, to the... oh, right, never mind. The show, by offering us a deeper look at its characters, not only makes them relatable and sympathetic in a way that will help us root for them and become invested in their struggles, but it also helps us understand why any of this would happen in the first place. It would be hard to buy into a reality as gruesome as this show proposes if the right stage had not been set for us to consider, alongside the characters, that taking part in such a game would be a legitimate choice for one to make. Because we wouldn't want our mothers to die. We would not want them to lose their jobs because of us. We would not want to be exploited and robbed, and we would not want to have our family broken apart. We would want the money necessary to save ourselves from that. And now, we can get to theme. It would be easy to mistake the game for a dystopian representation of society, and despite all of the shade this show might throw at it, that is not what it's standing for. If we consider society from a contractualistic standpoint, as Hobbes might see it, our way to escape the horrors of the state of nature where violence is the norm and death its goal, our way to live with rules set to protect people in exchange for their freedom, then the Squid Game would be the opposite of society. And because the condition of man is a condition of war, of everyone against everyone, in which case everyone is governed by his own reason, and there is nothing he can make use of that may not be a help unto him in preserving his life against his enemies, it followeth that in such a condition every man has a right to everything. Now, it would be wrong to say that there are no rules to the Squid Game, because there are. The player will not stop playing. The player who refuses to play will be eliminated. The games may be terminated upon a majority vote. There is also an ideology that the administrators enforce, one they claim upholds equality of opportunity as the highest of its tenets. And they do maintain a monopoly of power within the game, which by many is considered to be a prime characteristic of the state. The reason I say these pink condomed microphones and their edgelord are not representative of the state is because although these rules they do enforce over the players, as well as those for each game, none of them are serving the primary purpose of the state. According to Hobbes, the state of nature is pre-political, without law and without authority. Guided by a very egoistic conception of humankind that sees individuals as mistrustful and violent, selfish and self-centered, life can only reach one inevitable conclusion: a violent death. And it won't take long for it to get there. The fear of this violent death and the hope of a better material life is what motivates humanity to form a hypothetical pact or contract with the aim of ensuring peace and preserving the life of each individual. Squid Game does the opposite of this. In fact, it actively foments dissent and distrust, violence and conflict. It creates a breeding ground for discord. It is a constant of every game that the rules are simple and vague. This makes room for the players to bob and weave, to skirt and swerve around them for the sake of victory. There is no penalty for cheating, no limit to deceit. It is up to each individual player how they choose to win the games, and it is up to each individual player to choose whether to help or hinder the rest. It is every man for himself so long as the cheating does not incur help from outside the boundaries of the player area, no matter how clean this guy may claim the games to be. The 3 rules of the player consent form also say nothing about how to behave and manage life with the other contestants within the game, making it so that none of them are set in the search for peace and the avoidance of a brutal death. Nowhere is this more clear than in episode 4. After Big Boy here decides to kill the man accusing him of stealing his food, which he did steal, the pink condom enforcers remain impassive while the piggy in the sky fills up with the money that the organizers consider equivalent to the dead man's life. Realization dawns on the characters as well as the audience. You kill someone, you get a reward. It's gonna get rough after dark. The game is breeding mistrust, it is preventing progress, it is encouraging a violent death. The players are not members of society, but outside of it, temporary survivors of the state of nature. However, not all consider humanity this bestial, and neither, I think, does the show. So, in harmony with its tone, let's proceed to butcher some other smart guy's theory. John Locke was another contractualist, and he called bull on Hobbes' theory. He considered that the state of nature in which people live outside of society is one of good faith, mutual assistance, conservation and peace. To him, Hobbes is speaking of a state of war different to the natural state of humankind, where people act according to reason and in pure liberty, without any higher power to control their actions. The reason to form a state in his mind is to protect private property and seek progress, not to avoid a violent death. And judging by all I have shown so far, you may be inclined to disagree. When it comes to Squid Game, they're both correct. We do see violence amongst the participants in this state of nature as Hobbes depicts it, but we also see collaboration and mutual assistance as Locke does. In some cases, this collaboration might be motivated by personal gain and self-interest, where one character only helps the other because of what they might gain in return, a behavior we could associate with Hobbes' theory and, more accurately, attribute to psychological egoism. Meanwhile, in other cases, we can see that there is no personal gain motivating the character's actions, that they are selfless and collaborative in such a way that they fit with Locke's worldview. The second, though, wouldn't be so accurate. The right philosophy we're speaking of here is psychological altruism. When Sae-byeok forms an alliance, at least within the game, what he is thinking of is how this partnership will benefit him, which is why we see him betraying the trust of those around him, those whom he might have even called family or friend. On the other hand, Gi-hun's first alliance within the game is to an old man. This old man is not the strongest nor the most competent, and however wise he may be, could also turn out to be a liability in the games to come. In spite of that, it is Gi-hun who invites him to the group, where already there is an old friend from childhood and a man who saved his life. Although we could argue that he included them for his own social satisfaction, I believe that all of these choices were selfless and, quite possibly, mindless. He did not choose to make a team with these people because he wanted their social approval or because they presented an advantage to his survival. He did so because he liked them. with no more ulterior motive and no more thought behind the decision than a 5-year-old visiting the local playground. In the same vein, I do not believe that he invited Sae-byeok because he had seen her quiet competence, but because he was genuinely concerned that alone, she might not make it through the night. Like all great characters though, things are not set in stone when it comes to their actions, and there can exist many strings that pull them one way or the other. Flat characters or one-note characters are those whose motivations are singular and unchanging, making for a restriction of their actions. In Squid Game, by having more things on the line, we have characters that are more complex and human. Characters that we might think will or may want to see act a certain way, and then they don't. In episode 6, after the protagonists have already teamed up successfully and beaten the odds against a physically stronger team, the allegiance holds, and connections strengthen through the night. We see some volunteer for the first turn, others offer aid to the weakened, or comfort to the depressed. If only this episode had never happened. Psychological egoism, the most famous descriptive position, claims that each person has but one ultimate aim: her own welfare. This game asks the players to form groups of only 2, meaning that every team must separate. It is never stated that these 2 would be working together against the other pairs, and so naturally, they don't. In fact, the competition will be against each other. And because we all know co-op with friends is better than single player, Gi-hun goes against the old man he had been taking care of and who had taken care of him. Sang-woo goes against the kid he paid the bus for and shared the watch with, and Sae-byeok goes against the other quiet and mysterious girl in the team. It is here that the ideas of this theme get twisted and corrupted. We do not get any clear-cut answers to how human nature is. Sang-woo, who has been acting with his personal welfare as the ultimate goal, continues to do the same, betraying Ali in his naive optimism. Gi-hun is about to lose his life as well, until he takes advantage of the old man's apparent memory loss to cheat his way to victory. Even though we see the guilt in both their faces, and even though the old man is playing Gi-hun and ultimately chooses to sacrifice himself so his gambu may continue, we can no longer say that Gi-hun acted, in this instance, for others. This time he chose himself, and no longer represents the view of a man as a naturally peaceful and mutually assisting being. However, the argument is not over. Ji-young keeps it alive by sacrificing herself so that Sae-byeok can have a chance at winning and buying a house for her family. Although a questionable act in itself when you consider the weight it would put on the other person, it is unquestionably a selfless act. One that has anything but her own welfare in mind, and instead has that of Sae-byeok. This time the boys represent psychological egoism, while the girls do altruism. Psychological egoism is the thesis that we are always deep down motivated by what we perceive to be our own self-interest. Psychological altruism, on the other hand, is the view that sometimes we can have ultimately altruistic motives. Not coincidentally, these 3 are the only ones that make it to the end and become finalists. And if we see this as a struggle between Hobbes and Locke, between the violent and the peaceful man, egoism and altruism, then you can say violence is winning, and it's about to get worse. Sang-woo kills a weakened Sae-byeok after she stops the same thing from happening to him. At this point, a proponent for the peaceful man has abandoned these ideas, and both players, both survivors, both childhood friends, go into the Squid Game with one methodology in mind: to kill the other. Gi-hun wins this fight, and although not through peaceful means, he does seek one last desperate turn to bring it back and stop it in the same way that Sae-byeok stopped him. After all the violence, the anger, the betrayal, Gi-hun still hopes for a peaceful resolution to the conflict that will not have his friend killed. This would be the last chance for the peaceful man. He suggests that they both vote out and renounce the prize. But Sang-woo won't have it. He will not accept it, and this time, for the first time, he is acting against his self-interest and welfare. Sang-woo gives his friend the prize he will not take for himself, and the game ends with everyone but one dead. Although this could be interpreted as a triumph of the peaceful man in the state of nature over the violent one in the state of war, it still took violence to get there. The ultimately peaceful resolution, therefore, leaves a bitter taste in our mouths, and although this is where the show could have concluded with one final scene honouring the families of those who had passed, the show decided to add some more sweet to the bitter. There can be arguments for and against the final twist in the show. For one, it is interesting and well foreshadowed. For two, it may not have been very smart for the character, and it's not in perfect harmony with the theme, as the actions he takes are not congruent with the ideology he claims to uphold. But was that intentional or just a mistake? The final twist is revealed in a scene that has to be a metaphor for what we have seen. The old man, Lam, is revealed to be the head behind the organization that manages the Squid Game. This old man that you grew to care about alongside the protagonists, who showed affection towards the other participants and went through their horrors, is actually a cunt. And I do mean it this time. This guy put people he considered to be less than human into colourful concentration camps for the fun of it, and then pretended to be one of them to feel alive again. Whatever the case, I digress. Two things happen in this scene. One is that Locke's idea of the peaceful man prevails, as we have one last game played between the two men. This time Gi-hun strongly on the peaceful, collaborative side, while the other man represents that of the self-interested and potentially violent man. Gi-hun wins, and therefore so does the idea that man is not inherently self-interested, egotistical, selfish or violent, but that people are inherently predisposed towards mutual assistance, peace and rationality. The second thing it does is contradict everything I just said, adding one last idea on top of the first. That it is impossible that it could be better watching than playing it. The game in this case would be a metaphor for life. In other words, it claims it is impossible that watching life passively from within one's own made-up walls could ever be better than stepping out of them and living it. Which is why the old man is lying in a plain and empty room, looking out at the colourful life of the city below. Now, this scene is aiming to both help Gi-hun move on and close the themes out with a bow. The first it does, the second it does as well, but not without tangling up the knot. The theme of human nature was sufficiently explored and fastened tighter with this scene after the finale. But the second theme, the one that tells us that we should engage with others despite the risk of opening ourselves to human interaction, is in a way contradicting the first. Because if there are risks, we cannot assume the idea that prevailed, the concept of human nature that won, is correct. If everyone was peaceful and prone to cooperate and help others, then there would be no risks in playing the game of life. And therefore it cannot be that human nature is one or the other, but a messy combination of both. Lam possibly being the messiest of them all, considering how he treats people in his concentration camp. So, maybe my first conclusion was incorrect. Maybe it's not this or that, light or dark. Maybe what the show is trying to say is that there will be people willing to help, there will be people who are not. There will be people willing to do good, and there will be people willing to do wrong. And always will there be the potential for people to do both, with an emphasis on doing and not being. It encourages us to choose the first, but regardless of our choice, it prompts us to prevent fear from keeping us sheltered in our own isolated worlds and to go out and live, to play the game of life. Now, if you're anything like me, what this means is that you want to stand up and dash over to the nearest bar. I'm gonna go do that, but I'll finish by saying this. No matter what ideas are explored in a story, we first have to care about it before we can ever consider them. Squid Game, however it may have handled its final twists, does this perfectly. First, it gets us to care about the characters, showing us their strengths and their faults, their dreams and their nightmares. Then it shows us more by having those same characters react and relate to each other, so that the connections we have to them are no longer isolated but shared with the cast as they form their own relationships amongst themselves. Then, and only then, does Squid Game develop its ideas, explore its themes, and share a possible conclusion to its musings. This way, it is the characters in conflict, the story, that makes us care about its ideas, and not the other way around. Just like the scene where it all began, in the subway with a stranger, Squid Game's success has less to do with its premise or message than it does with its execution. Unless already predisposed to its concepts, the reason we keep watching is not because we want to know the moral, or because the themes captivate us, as they can usually be distilled to simple ideas. The reason we keep watching, as are the millions beside us, is because of how Squid Game tells its story and how it shares its message. Through its slow introduction, we are set up to care about our protagonist, to empathize with his struggles. In fact, it is the show's willingness to linger on each character and their life outside the game that gets us invested in their story so much. It is not just that we want to see who wins and the drama that ensues like it's another failed Netflix reality show. We care about them because we know them. We want Gi-hun to have a chance of being a father. We want Sang-woo to pay his debts so his mother does not lose her shop. We want Ali to leave Korea behind because he's a goddamn hero, honestly. And we want Sae-byeok to reunite her family, and that's not just because I'm in love with her. The reason this show is Netflix's most successful debut ever is because we care about the characters and their journeys first, before we can ever pay attention to how cohesive and sometimes bemused the themes might be. At the end of the day, it is not words that we care about, it's people. And because I can never shut up, I will also say that the same arguments I used on this video to claim that the Squid Game does not stand for society could also be used to say that it does. In that case, what the show might be saying is that, like the meme, we live in a society, which is a flawed system that instead of setting rules to help us all live in peace and keep us from murdering these uncanny movie NPCs, it is doing the opposite, by design rather than incompetence, so that people will be living in a state of nature within society propagated by the capital S state while exploiting our ever-seeking climb to reach success and happiness. This would mean that Squid Game believes that society has failed in the purpose that Hobbes and even Locke gave it, and could make the whole thing an allegory for class struggles and the bloody road that leads to success, the pursuit of happiness that gives justification to the violence and that all too subtle symbolism. Be it communism or anarchism, this is what we know as a negative theory on the justification of the state, whereas contractualism is one of the positive ones in the sense that the second considers the state a good thing, whereas for the firsts, the capital S stands for shit. If you asked me what Squid Game is, or is trying to be, I'd say it's an anarchist piece of media that seeks to shed a light on the true nature of society as it understands it. A system whereby the few secretly oppress the many, an anti-capitalist piece that hates the way such a system turns each person into a mere fistful of ones, while advocating for an altruistic view of human nature. The only one it can advocate for if it wants either of these negative theories to work. Because for people to put community first, or for the sword arm of the state to fall, altruism is a must and egoism is unacceptable. In which case the conclusion previously reached should be changed in one of two ways. Either altruism outright won, and that is the way humanity is naturally born to be, or, as a more likely twist to my original conclusion, regardless of how any one of us might be naturally inclined to act, altruism can and should be learned, just like Gi-hun did.
He's giving up the prize money right here at the very edge of victory.
The reason I did not present this interpretation was twofold. One, I prefer Parasite's more nuanced take on class, which does not point a finger at some, painting them as moustache-twirling villains who revel in the suffering of our heroes. Two, although I believe that mine is not the interpretation the authors intended, and that they did write the show as a negative take on society and egoism, which I should clarify is not considered inherently wrong outside this show, I find the question of human nature much more interesting than that of societal organization. And three, because apparently I'm feeling cheeky today, that Squid Game vs. Capitalism video has already been made multiple times.
Capitalism.
So, whether you adhere to a positive view of the state as a system designed to protect us from ourselves and or better our lives, like contractualism, or you believe it to be a big old pile of shit, a well-oiled machine of oppression that needs to be destroyed as is to save the many from the power of the few, i.e. a negative theory, or you think it's anything in between, let us all get together now, we self-centered altruists, and go grab that drink. Cheers to you.